James, what is the title of your new release?
The book's called Shout It Out Loud, The Story of Kiss's Destroyer and the Making of an American Icon.
When I hear that title, I think of icons. Why is Kiss an icon?
They absolutely are, and especially an American one. That's the key element to it. They've become, they're more than a band. They're more than a rock band, certainly, more than a pop act. They encompass, and I think Destroyer, the album I'm writing about, really does cover this. They encompass all the concepts of a great icon. Their look, specifically their look. It works on a T-shirt, a billboard, anything, a poster, certainly, an album cover. Their anthemic songs. Their songs speak to wide swaths of people, not just specifics, where heavy metal has a specific audience, pop, funk. Kiss is beyond that, really. And they've been able to do the one thing you must do in iconic status, whether you look at Elvis Presley or Frank Sinatra or the Beatles. They're an entity that passes all media. They've done film, and albeit a bad one, but they did one, recording, concerts. They've had, and they've been parody. That's when you know you're an icon. They've been parodied so much on Family Guy, and on so many different TV shows, Saturday Night Live. Famous people wear the Kiss makeup. I just saw a commercial recently where a guy goes up to the door and he's supposed to be dressed as like some 80s rock guy, but he's got the star. He's got Paul Stanley's star on his face. That's iconic. That's beyond the point of just being a rock band. And I think what my book is trying to suppose, or what I'm putting forth, is that until Destroyer, that was not the case. They were an oddity. They were a great rock band, a very interesting rock band with a great show. The makeup, the attitude was there, but they didn't pass into that iconic status, into that, oh, I know what that is. That's Kiss, no matter where you are in the world or what age you are or what music you like, until Destroyer. That changed everything.
So let's go back in time. You're a young man. When is the first time you ever saw Kiss? On TV? Heard them on the radio?
It's a great question. I talk about this in the book. My origins with Kiss is when I was a preteen, 12, 13. I remember I was talking to a friend of mine in 7th grade or 8th grade, and he had Kiss Alive under his arm. So I didn't even hear it. I just saw it under the arm. And that just shows you the power of Kiss's imagery. I saw that cover of Kiss Alive, and I just had to have it. I loved comic books and horror films. Another thing that Kiss passes over into other genres of interest for people. But when I saw that, I had to have it. And of course, I did get it for my 8th grade graduation. My parents got me Kiss Alive, and I played it that whole summer, as you know. And then when I found out that Destroyer was out, it had been out that spring, I had to have it. And of course, just seeing that painted comic book cover, I mean, I was sold. I was gone from that point.
So when Kiss was coming up, for you, had you heard anything about them? Was it a sudden notice?
It was. I had never heard anything about Kiss. One time, and it's weird, when I heard Rock and Roll All Night on an AM station on ABC, and the recorded version, not the live version. So it was before live came out. But I didn't put the two together. But then later on, when I heard it, I was like, I remember that one time lying in bed, my little AM radio, and hearing Rock and Roll All Night, and being excited by that. And I thought that's one of the anthemic things I'm talking about. That really spoke to me as a young man. And I talk about their zeitgeist in the book, their original base, their fan base, which Bob Ezrin, the producer of Destroyer, calls the 13-year-old pimply boys. But it's true. I was one of those 13-year-old pimply boys that immediately got it. That whole suburban, white, upper middle class kid who wants to get out. He wants to go to the big city where Spider-Man is. He wants to go live the adventures. Kiss really spoke to me that way.
Now, when Kiss came up, they presumed that they were going to be big stars. Gene Simmons has said that he wanted to be the next Beatles. In your book, you go through the early days to some degree,
right,
and you show the struggles that they had as a band trying to be successful. Tell me about that.
Yeah, that's the one thing I loved learning when I working on this book, is the origin of Kiss. And thanks to great authors like Ken Sharp, who I got to know in the process of this book, and he really supported me a great deal and helped me out. He's written a couple of books with Kiss about it and about their origins, where they came from. But in my book, I call this, what you just mentioned, what Kiss is. They never had a gestation period. There was never this REM, U2, make it through the colleges, play the clubs, get big at the Stone Pony like Bruce Springsteen or The Bottom Line, or play somewhere and have that moment like Meatloaf. Kiss came out blasting from the very beginning, and I call this the act, capital T, capital A in my book. What I'm trying to say there, and I'm not doing it pejoratively, I'm saying that Kiss made this thing that was already built in. They had the basis of an icon already built in when they were nobody. They came out full bore, and and that's why I think a lot of people attach themselves to them, because they felt like they were attaching themselves to a really winning concept. They felt part of it. It's a real group thing. I think it was Klosterman, Chuck Klosterman, who said somewhere he loves the idea of the Kiss Army because it's an army, man. Who has an army? It's like Kiss is saying, don't just love us. Okay, don't just love rock music. You got to love yourself, and that in turn is a movement. And I think that's a great thing. It's sort of a communal. I say in Shout It Out Loud, the song Shout It Out Loud, they're not saying, hey, join us. They're saying, we're helping you get to that point. You're part of us. It's a grouping. That's why you see a lot of Kiss fans these days. 50, 60-year-old men go on these cruises. They got these tattoos. They take their grandchildren to these shows. It's almost like a cult. And I learned that when I first started working on the book. My real origins of working on the book was like, I think I'm diving into a deep end of a pool here, culturally.
Now, the Kiss story, of course, has the first 3 albums,
right,
which had moderate, if not great success. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, Alive comes along. Right. Now, Alive is the album directly before Destroyer.
Correct.
So that sets up the success of Destroyer, but your book reaches back to show how precarious Kiss was, right, in terms of their success at the time.
Yeah, it's true. One of the myths, and I know we're kind of promoting it as a myth-busting book, but in many ways it is. Every icon has to have a myth. That's the whole point of having an icon, and I love perpetuating that. And all the people I interviewed for this book, whether it's Bob Gruen, award-winning, iconic himself, photographer, or Scott Shannon, one of the great radio voices in American history, they all got it. When they came on board, they loved perpetuating that myth. They never wanted to take photographs of Kiss without their makeup, or they didn't want to promote them as anything other than what they were, because it was already packaged, as I said before. But the myth that Kiss recorded Destroyer in the aftermath of the popularity of Alive is not entirely true. They started working on it. They hired Bob Ezrin to pull them out of the morass of the first 3 albums, which wasn't selling. We're talking about 50,000 units, 45,000, 70,000 units, which is okay, but nothing where they needed to be. None of their albums really projected their image, what I talked about before, the way they needed to project them, that each character had a personality. Paul had his personality, and Gene, of course, the demon and the Catman. And these were all built in, but those albums were all songs about sex or living on the street, or the kind of things you'd write about if you're in any rock band. But none of it had that great comic book appeal that you need. And so they hired Bob, because he had worked with Alice Cooper, to create this in August, really, or the spring of 1975. This was months before Alive was even recorded or conceived, much less came out. Alive came out, as we know, in the fall that year and blew up during Christmas. Kiss had already had their rehearsals, written their songs, worked with Bob, had this whole lawsuit, which I talk about in the book, and then they had to split. And then they eventually got to Record Plant in New York, which my book covers a lot of the history of the Record Plant. And they started recording in January of that year, just when Alive was really... So when they came in, as Corky Stasiak, the assistant engineer who I interviewed in the book, he said they came in paupers, they left stars. So it's a great arc, the story of Destroyer, because they come in really with nothing and leave being one of the bigger bands in the world.
You've mentioned Bob Ezrin.
Yeah.
Bob Ezrin is, for anyone who knows music from the 70s, 80s, and beyond into the modern era, knows that Bob Ezrin has produced some of the greatest pieces of rock in history.
He's a bit of an icon himself, yeah.
He is, and in fact, maybe a book could come out of
right,
that.
about Bob,
Like,
sure.
Tell a little bit right now, and I'm sure the book is going to cover a lot of this, the influence that Bob had on Kiss as musicians.
That's a great question. Let me just get back. Let me just say something about Bob Ezrin. Half of my book is about Bob Ezrin, because half of the story of Kiss Destroyer and half the story of the iconic, the movement of Kiss from this rock oddity to this other thing entirely is Bob's vision, as well as Bill Aucoin, their manager, and Neil Bogart, the president of and founder of Casablanca Records, and of course the four guys in Kiss: Paul, Gene, Peter, and Ace. Bob was exactly what Kiss needed at the time. Cinematic in his viewpoint, fantastical. He pushed their limits, not only musically, but image. He made sure that Gene Simmons sang God of Thunder. He made sure that Paul Stanley screamed out, "Do you love me?" He made sure that Detroit Rock City was this aria. It was an opera. It was a great rock and roll opera. How many songs have been written about car accidents, young people getting in cars? It's classic Americana. That's all Bob. And when Bob came, he changed everything. And I wanted this book as much to be about Bob, and that's why Bob was my Wizard of Oz. I said it from the very beginning. I told you, I tell everybody that I had to talk to about the book, if I don't get Bob Ezrin for this book, it can't be a book. Bob has got the secret to the keys to the whole Destroyer concept and what Kiss later became. And Kiss used him again in, to not as great effect, obviously, with The Elder and later on with Revenge in the 90s. But they kept coming back to Bob whenever they had points in their career where they needed that jolt because he gave them that with Destroyer. But he changed them, their image. He made them disciplined in the studio. He broke them down, the famous boot camp, which I really cover extensively. I don't think that's ever been covered this extensively in a book before, where he really stripped them right down to what they can do. And he's very effusive in saying everybody in the band really hit above their weight. I'm using his term. They came, they learned, and they were better for it. Musically, paying attention to details, songwriting, creating images in the music. And that's why that record attacked me when it did, stayed with me my whole life, and I had to write about it.
Now, when you look at the album itself, it has each member of the team, so to speak, gets their spotlight moment.
Right.
There's no ace song necessarily, as
Right.
there would be later on, but he has some great guitar solos, especially in Detroit Rock City. I'm sure in your book you talk about the making of each of these songs to a certain degree. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, the reason why I wrote this book, first of all, and first and foremost, is that there is no real intellectual, cerebral, I don't want to get too pretentious here, but no one's ever put Kiss through this kind of dissection, this kind of deconstruction. And I thought that was a crime. I really do. And the whole thing was sort of born in an article I wrote for the Aquarian Weekly, where I'm a contributing editor, and also for the Huffington Post, where it really blew up. In 2010, 2011, when I first found out that Kiss was not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which I found absurd. That all these bands that opened for them, like AC/DC and Van Halen, were in, but not Kiss. And so I wrote this article, this column, titled, "Why the fuck isn't Kiss in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?" And that was so popular and got so much feedback that I thought, you know what? I think one of the reasons is that they've played up this idea as, hey, we're just a fun-loving band. We don't have any, which is true. There's no subtext to Kiss. They're not trying to change anything. They're not riding any cultural wave. It's entertainment. As Gene says, you can find out about the bad stuff in the newspaper. When you come here, forget everything for 2 hours. It's fantasy. Or as Paul Stanley said, we want to be the band we want to see. So I wanted to write the book I wanted to read. I wanted a book that reflected Kiss, that gave them their due, which I think is well overdue. And I'm not saying mine, I know for a fact mine's the only one. I hope it's not the last. But no one has ever really kind of dissected or deconstructed Kiss. The music, the image, the concepts, all of it's there. There's like 7 or 8 depths to it. And that's one thing Bob Ezrin understood, and that's one thing I understood going in, and I learned even more, and it corroborated all of my inspiration to write the book. I went in with an idea, and it fed me even more. Everybody who worked on the book all gave me that. They told me exactly what I thought was coming. We all knew this was a big deal. We all put all of our efforts in, whether it was Corky Stasiak, the assistant engineer, Jay Messina, the lead engineer, Dennis Wallach, who worked on their cover and all their stuff, Ken Kelly, who painted the iconic cover, Mark Ravitz, who did their groundbreaking tour, the Spirit of 76 tour. All these guys knew. They all knew what they were doing, that this was a major moment in rock history. No one's ever talked about it, and I'm glad I did it.
So when you look at the album, it was a culmination of a vision that Gene and Paul and the other guys came up with.
Right.
Realized by the help of all these others, Bob Ezrin especially, For you personally as a listener,
Right.
when you listen to the album, what are some of the things that stand out to you about the album itself?
Well, I go through every song. Someone joked recently on the internet, well, this is a 300 plus page book on Destroyer. It's got to have some detail to it. It does. I go through every song. And that's why Hal Leonard, my publisher, is great. Backbeat Books is my actual publisher, but Hal Leonard is the parent company. And they do all music publishing all over the world, one of the biggest in the world, if not the biggest. So getting the lyrics, getting the rights, all this, I'm able to mine all this stuff. Really came in handy. So every song is deconstructed. And I found that by doing so, I was again proved correct, that there was worth to this, there was depth to it, that the songs had meaning. I talk about it all the time. Destroyer hits all the bells, okay? It's a rock album about power. When you're 13 and you're living in that suburb, you know what I mean? You got your bedroom, you don't have your own car yet, you don't have, King of the Nighttime World, I want to get out of this thing. I want to get out of this bedroom. I want to blast out. I want to experience these things. Great Expectations, Shout It Out Loud, Flaming Youth. These songs speak to the powerless empowering. It also talks about speed, with the not only speed with car, but growing up quickly, learning things quickly, taking on the world. And obviously, there's plenty of sex in there, and there's plenty of fantastical stuff. I mean, geez, how many albums do you get where it's got Greek references alongside, S&M references? It's all in there, And then you got the ballad, which, takes it to. I'm one of the few Kiss fans who just loves Beth. Always did, even when I was a kid. I know a lot of people are like, oh, why did they put that on? Even this today, it's very controversial. But not me. I love the whole damn thing. This is one of the reasons why I love Bob Ezrin and Alice Cooper, because he took Only Women Bleed, that had made number 12 on the charts only a year earlier, and Here It Comes Beth makes it to number 7, which is still the highest charting record in the history of Kiss to this day.
Part of the iconic aspect of the album you mentioned before is the cover. And that cover depicts the superhero Kiss leaving a devastated city of some sort that you see on the back. And that goes along with what you said about the power.
Right.
For you, when you see that cover, what does it bring forth?
The cover is the number one for me. That's the number one touchstone for me. That's the one when we were kids, and I talk about this a lot in the book, and everybody, again, that had to do with the album talks about the difference of the 1970s to today. In the 1970s, if you really wanted to listen to a record, and everyone wanted to do this, you went into your bedroom, your den, put the record on, so you were tethered by the record player or the stereo. You had your headphones 9 times out of 10, but if you even didn't, you need something to look at. That's your visual for all this oral, especially with Bob Ezrin with the cinematic aspects, all the sound effects and everything that's going on in Destroyer, and to have that cover, that painting, to have it be this thing you saw on the cover of Creepy or Conan the Barbarian or all these things that were in our transom, as kids, all the horror comics, all the superhero comics, it's all there. I mean, that's what I'm talking about with Kiss becoming an icon for Destroyer. They're literally an icon jumping off the top of a mountain. You can read anything you want into that. Are they coming up over the mountain after destroying the city behind them? Are they coming down from Mount Olympus like these Greek gods sort of expressing themselves? Are they dancing on top of a mountain of rock, presupposing their fame? It's all right there in that cover. That cover is brilliant, and it's painted by Ken Kelly, who I got to know. And one of the great thrills of writing this book is that after knowing Ken, he sent me a drawing of that painting to me personally and signed it to me. Good luck with the book, which for me, even if the book didn't get published or I didn't get a dime for it or no one read it, that was worth it. That was a great, great gift. So, and I talk about the entire, I dedicate an entire chapter to the cover, because the cover is number one on the hit parade. The things I tried to hit in the book was, I have a full history of the record plant where they recorded it, a full history of everybody who worked on the record, and a full history of everybody who worked with Kiss, bringing them up. Even if people have passed away, like Sean Delaney and Bill Aucoin, and we talked about Neil Bogart before. I made sure I went back in the archives and got interviews and read everything that I could and put it in the book. I tried to leave no stone unturned. All the Kiss autobiographies, their memoirs are all quoted. Anything that was in any magazine, everything. There's dozens and dozens of sources, and all the new interviews that I did. I made sure everybody got on record because everybody was a part of it. It wasn't just the four guys in Kiss. We're talking about a massive amount of people, really talented people who made Destroyer Destroyer, and extrapolate that out, made Kiss Kiss.
Now, when you look back at that era, I know there's been books out about the history of Casablanca Records and the early days of Kiss. Individuals have put autobiographies out.
Right.
What were some of the fun things that you may have discovered that you had never known before, or that there may have been some myth that you found out was not quite the truth?
This book was a labor of love from Jump Street for me. So I dove into this before I had a publisher, before I had any concept, because I wanted to do it. I wanted to know. I wanted to talk to these people, and I wanted to learn about Destroyer. And I did learn a ton of stuff that I never knew before and is in no other books. And it's great, too, because I want to make this point. I said before there's no real deconstruction, intellectual breakdown of Kiss that put them on a loftier pedestal, I think, as far as critique. And that's true. But there were a lot of people who did yeoman's work with Kiss, writing books and background information and articles written in Cream magazine, Circus, even Rolling Stone magazine. So I want to give them credit.
Do you consider this Kiss book your crowning achievement?
In research, I did a lot of research for this book. It took years. And it brought me to a lot of places I didn't think I was going to go. I'm glad I did, though. And I met a ton of really great people, insiders, real legends in the business. And I learned so much about recording, so much about marketing, so much about the organic way that bands and singles and record albums and images and concerts were done in the 1970s. And as much as the listening aspect, the fans, as I said earlier, how people listened to record albums, and they had side one, which is act one. You flipped it over, and you're in the room by yourself with your headphones, with your cover, and everything we talked about before that's totally different before the advent of the Walkman and then the MP3 players and cassette players in cars, where people were absorbing music with all these other distractions. We didn't have that in the 70s. You went upstairs, you listened to your records, and that was your little cubby. That was your experience you had. It was a one-on-one experience with the artists. But what I learned most is that period of time, the 1970s, going into a big studio, a classic studio like the Record Plant, and I write extensively about its history, what it meant for artists to go there and play in places that Jimi Hendrix recorded some of his great works and other great artists, and to go in there with these huge boards and have to use real mics, and everything's analog. There's no digital, everything's with the meters and how the room sounds, and everything's recorded. I learned so much about that. The research was the most fun, and I'm hoping that readers will learn that world, for the most part. I know you have a few bands that still stick with it, like the Foo Fighters who go to studios and record analog, but for the most part, everybody's using Pro Tools now. Even the guys who worked on this record, like Jay Messina, says, well, I use Pro Tools now. Of course, why wouldn't we? We would have loved it. We probably would have used it then. But they didn't have that available then. So to have to break everything down to 24 tracks and then record the drums, in an elevator shaft, and to record, the one song in a booth, and then have the amps bleeding into each other, and then record real strings at the famous A&R studios where Sinatra recorded and where Dylan recorded Like a Rolling Stone. It was just great being led through this labyrinth of history, and I hope it comes through in the book.
As people have watched Kiss evolve over the years, when you look back at Destroyer, do you look at that as the culmination and perhaps the end of Kiss?
I look at Destroyer as really the beginning of Kiss. But the interesting thing about Destroyer is it's its own entity. It was never repeated. It sounds so alien to everything else. It stands on its own. There's not even a lead-up the way Sgt. Pepper's has Revolver before it. Like Blonde on Blonde has Highway 61. There's none of that for Destroyer. There's Dress to Kill, which is a stripped-down 30-minute rock and roll album that is, I love the sound of it, but it was produced by Bogart, who is not a producer, and he was high for most of it. And then Kiss Alive, which is loud cacophony with screaming and cheering and everything throughout it. And then after they did Destroyer, they ran to Eddie Kramer and they recorded a live album in Nanuet, in a theater in Nanuet. So Destroyer is like their Sgt. Pepper's, but they never follow its own entity, Destroyer. So I see it as kind of like its own thing, but it launched, it catapulted Kiss to that icon status I talked about before. But I think it's the one album, and they could never go back. After the albums they recorded, they always had that Destroyer as their headwind. Paul is forever the lover, is the dreamer, the fantasy guy. Gene is forever the demon. I mean, God of Thunder's the first time he put that growl on tape, and he never went back. Peter Criss is the tough guy, is drumming in the record is brilliant. He even admits it to himself. It was grueling for him, but it was brilliant. And he sings the ballad. And they tried to recreate that later with Hard Luck Woman and other things, but they never could because of Ezrin's beautiful string arrangement. And Ace Frehley is always there. Ace is always there. He's the heart and soul of what they are. He's the guy that was their best musician in the early days, who was the flashy guitar player. He's all over it as well. And he's forever the Ace in that record. So, and of course, the cover helps. So I think that's the beginning of Kiss, but it's this snapshot. It's this moment in time that was never repeated. It's very, very strange. I try to think of one, but I can't think of another time in the history of rock and roll, or maybe any music for that matter, where someone has recorded something that you never saw coming and was never even repeated. Not even close. It's weird.
And 40 years later, the
40 years,
legacy of Destroyer lives on. So you may be arguing that without this success of theirs,
Right.
Kiss would not be around today.
Right.
In its current form.
There's no way. In my mind, there's no way Kiss is the Kiss you know without Destroyer. It changed everything. And the other thing, too, is it shocked a lot of people. A lot of people rejected it immediately. Kiss was appalled. They ran and they panicked. They almost pulled the thing. Bill Aucoin called up Bob Ezrin and told him, we can't work with you anymore. You've ruined us. There was a lot of furor and browbeating over this record. People were afraid. It had strings on it. It's got backwards tracks. It's got, ballads and choirs and calliopes. What the hell are they doing? But what they were doing was they were creating this incredible fantasy thing that they have today, and they've perpetuated it for 40 years from that album and whatever they are at 73, so whatever the heck, how many years they've been at it. But that was a period where it was in and of itself its own time. And I think also, even the band now, as time has gone on, they've realized. I saw Paul Stanley do an interview in '96 when they did the reunion. He said, I got to say, Destroyer's the quintessential Kiss album. He goes, we still play 4 or 5 of those songs to this day. It's the only Kiss album, I think, that every one of the songs were played live somewhere. I think for the Kiss Live 4, they did it with a choir in Australia. So they've done all of their songs live, or it's on the greatest hits. I mean, think about the songs on that record that have survived. Beth, obviously, Shout It Out Loud, Detroit Rock City, King of the Nighttime World. God of Thunder became Gene's song. It became the drum solo song. Detroit Rock City is a perfect concert opener. They still use it to this day. I mean, it really...
Do You Love Me?
Do You Love Me? It's still played. It was played in the acoustic version. And when Kiss got back together, what's the song that people remember when they did the Unplugged? What's the song that they got the standing ovation and people were really actually tearing up? It was Beth. When they did Beth, people it's a touchstone for them. And well, it should be. It was a huge hit. And even though it's not Kiss, it is Kiss. Think about what Beth is. Beth is everything that Destroyer is supposed to be, what Kiss is supposed to be. All for one, one for all. Let's create a fantasy. Well, we're not really playing on it, but what is it creating? It's creating an attitude. It's creating a cinema scope. It's a soundscape, which I use that word a lot in the book. And I wasn't the only one. There are other guys who worked on it musically. So, and it's a long-winded answer to say that Destroyer really, in many ways, is in and of itself its thing. It launched Kiss, but it's a time capsule. It really is. But it's a time capsule that is not it's not anachronistic. It doesn't stick in the 70s. It still comes to this day. And I talk about in the last chapter of the book, you mentioned legacy. Scott Ian from Anthrax talked to me on the record about it. Adam Duritz from the Counting Crows. Quite a few people have talked about it. Guys in the Red Hot Chili Peppers, many bands from that second wave, the 90s wave, that revere that record, that period of time. And there's a reason for that. And I think the fact that it's all those songs are still used in pop culture. Kiss bought a football team, right? So they did a reality show. What song did they play to promote it? Shout It Out Loud. When Gene Simmons had said in Esquire magazine last year, rock is dead, Dave Grohl from the Foo Fighters said, "Excuse me a second there, God of Thunder." He used God of Thunder as a touchdown. I was listening to a pregame of a Monday Night Football game from Detroit between the Giants and the Lions. What are they playing coming in and out of the break? Detroit Rock City. Those are 3 songs that were recorded in 1976 that still exist today in the pop culture. Can't say that about a lot of songs recorded in 1976 for sure.
The story of the success of Destroyer really owes itself to the success of Beth. And that is an interesting tale in itself.
Sure is. Yeah. The story of Beth is the story of Destroyer in many ways. Destroyer did have, despite all the gnashing of teeth, Destroyer had a huge spike. It went gold in about 2 months. It sold more than any other Kiss album. I think close to Live, but definitely more than any other Kiss studio album, for sure. And when I talk about this, I talk about studio albums. I know how much Alive means to fans and in the pantheon of Kiss, but Destroyer is a studio album, and let's make that clear. Even though most of Kiss Alive is, but it sort of dove somewhere around May, right after Ace Frehley got married, and they all celebrated there, and they all went to Europe, and Kiss came back, and they were planning on doing the Destroyer tour proper, which was Spirit of '76 tour, which did kick off July 3rd, the day before 4th of July, and no more American Icon. The day before the bicentennial of this country, Kiss kicks off their Spirit of '76 tour, and it blows really the pop culture away. I mean, one of the great sets, and I talked to Mark Ravitch, who designed it. But anyway, right around that time, though, despite all the pomp and circumstance, the album started to dive, and fast, out of the charts. It had sold to who it was going to sell to, and that's the end of it. And I remember Bob Ezrin and Dennis Wallach, who was their graphic designer and art director, and later on, Scott Shannon, who I interview extensively in the book, who is a famous DJ, who works here in New York for CBS FM, has worked for 40 years, is in every Hall of Fame you can imagine. He worked as a PR director for Casablanca, and they said one thing: make Kiss a crossover act. Get something to AM radio. Get something on the charts. And to his credit, he saw that Beth was the only song that could make it off that record. They tried everything. They tried Shout It Out Loud, which did pretty well. They tried Detroit Rock City. They tried Flaming Youth. Nothing really did anything. And the famous story is, and it's a little bit more in depth, and Scott is very, very adamant when he talked to me, please get this right. So my book hopefully has it right, that he really did take it from the B-side to the A-side. And he had acetates made up, and he sent it out. And it was a great story of organic, grassroots, 70s way of a song becoming a hit, where people played it in these small places in the South. Then it moved up to Boston, and it started to get played. And people didn't even care who it was. What's this beautiful ballad with lush strings about a guy longing for the girl, singing from the road? Please wait, I'll be back. And there's a great backstory to Beth that I put in the book as well, which is kind of out there as well, the original of that, which is called Beck, but I won't get into that now. But Beth exploded Destroyer again. It went up to number 7, which I said is the highest charting single in Kiss history, and it made Destroyer a hit again. It catapulted back up the charts. That's unprecedented as well, for an album to go from number 11, where it topped out, somewhere I think in May of 76, and then it tumbled all the way back out. And then in August, here comes Beth. So all the way through Christmas, when they did the Paul Lynde special, and they played Beth, and they played all Destroyer, even though they had Rock and Roll Over was out by then, they still played all the Destroyer stuff. Why? Because Destroyer was up there. So Beth is the story of Destroyer and vice versa.
Do you believe that the 70s was the time period lent itself towards this culmination of Kiss?
Kiss was perfect for the time.
Artistic vision.
Yes. Kiss is perfect for the time. All the things I said before. The fantasy. I talk a lot about the period of time in the 70s. This idea, disaster films, anti-hero films, things like Towering Inferno and Earthquake and Poseidon Adventure alongside, the Dirty Harry and all these films of these anti-heroes. Crime was rampant in New York City everywhere. Taxi Driver came out right around the same time. I mean, no more crime-laden film is there about New York. this is in the wake of Watergate, the fears of what the Carter might do about the Middle East, Hal Lindsey's The Late Great Planet Earth, the cults, all the things that came around in the 70s. Here comes Kiss. It's the first time since probably like Elvis or even the Beatles where someone said, forget all that. Look at this. And I think it really spoke to it. It really did. They were of their time. And because the 70s were so over the top and Destroyer is so over the top, it completely is. And it's accepted that way because that's the time, nobody questioned people with big giant afros and lifts and loud shirts. That's the 70s, and that's what Destroyer is.
So we fast forward to 2015.
Right.
Almost 40 years since the release. Talk about the fans. Now, we've got old fans like us.
Right.
We've got fans from the 80s.
True. Yes.
Fans from the last 5 years. 6-year-old kids.
Mm-hmm.
How, obviously you want everyone to read this book at some point.
Right.
How does this book speak to them?
Well, I hope I'm a Kiss fan. There's a lot of stuff out in the internet now on the blogs and everything. Who's this guy? Is he going to do this and that? And that? Well, I'm a Kiss fan, number one. I've interviewed Paul Stanley. I wrote that piece I mentioned before about why the fuck wasn't Kiss in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which they are, and I'm hoping I was a small part of that movement. And I just thought that if they have that much of a fan base that goes from 6 years old to 60, and let's be honest, there are 60-year-old Kiss fans out there. They've been around that long. I mean, we're talking about the early 70s here. That they should have a book. And I don't want to be bold and say that my book is it, but I'm hoping it is. I hope it is that not the last word, but a word on Kiss that's more than just, kiss and tell, no pun intended, perpetuating the myths, putting forth all the stuff that you normally read, the backstage stuff, the sexual, the innuendos, the money, the abuses, the drugs. That's all in there. But I wanted the book to also really dissect, and I use this word a lot, deconstruct what Kiss was, why it meant a lot to a lot of people, and why Destroyer, I think, is one of the great, and I mean this, this is not hyperbolic, I think Destroyer is one of the great 70s statements by a rock band. I really do. And it spoke to a ton of people, a ton of really smart, talented people who to this day really still revere it. And I'm one of them. So I want fans to know that I did it with the most amount of care and love. Is there going to be stuff in there that's controversial? Absolutely. Is there going to be stuff in there that's going to rub Kiss fans the wrong way? Yeah, I'm a little hard on Kiss, especially the early days. And do I give Bob Ezrin a huge amount of credit for being their Svengali during Destroyer? Absolutely. I don't think I came in thinking it, and when I was done, I pretty much am convinced that I wish Bob had stayed with them. I think they would have, I don't know what they would have done, but I'm glad we have Destroyer. That's the snapshot, as I said before. That's that one moment of time that we have when he sat in there with those 4 guys, and he said, just give me a couple of months. Just give me your attention. Give me your all, and I'll get you something great. And I think he did it, and I think Corky Stasiak, who was the assistant engineer, and Corky did so much to help this book, gave me inside photographs that no one's ever seen before, inside stories. He kept a journal, which he shared with me. Corky said, for years they were always saying, we never could capture the live sound. We could never capture the live sound. Well, if you listen to Destroyer, it's like you're at some massive hall somewhere, and the big screen opens up, and there goes the curtains, and here comes this thing. What is this thing? It opens up with the radio and that drama at the beginning, and then they're in your face, and it ends with that weird stuff at the end. It's great. It's like a novella. I call it Kiss's mission statement. I call it their manifesto, and I think it is. And I think it deserved that kind of literal spotlight, and I hope I will give it for the fans. They deserve it, and so does Kiss, I think.
Okay. Cut. That's it.
That's it?